stream going and everybody can get their teas and coffees. This is your 2-minute warning. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Children and Family Scrutiny Board. My name is Councillor Dan Cohen. I will be chairing today's meeting, which is where all of us want to be on a glorious sunny day. Today is summer in Leeds, and this is how we're spending it. So we get brownie points for that. Later on, I'm sure. The meeting is being webcast. Those people that wish to sit outside in the park and watch on one of their devices rather than observing us in person. Before I move into the substantive items of the meeting, I do want to take the opportunity to wish all those who work in schools a huge vote of thanks for their incredible effort at the end of what has been a long and challenging school and college year. As we are, of course, about to break up, I wish each and every one of you, and of course, students and children and parents and carers, a wonderful and enjoyable summer holiday. So we will invite board members and guests to introduce themselves. Can I remind you, please, to mute your microphone once you have introduced yourselves, and just for this time, we'll go to the left.
Andrew Graham, co-opted member representing the Church of England Diocese of Leeds.
Nick Tone, school staff representative, and just saying thank you for those kind words from the chair. Much appreciated.
Councillor Karen Renshaw representing Arleston and Robin Hood, and thank you to all the schools in our city for doing so well. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor David Jenkins, representing Killingbeck and Seacroft.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Oliver Edwards, representing Guernsey and Rawdon wards.
Good afternoon. My name is Councillor Raymond Jones. I represent the ward of Horsforth.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Councillor Jules Hesselwood and I represent Wheatwood ward. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor Andy Rowntree. I represent Kirkstall. I'm here today as a substitute for Councillor Lisa Martin.
Hello everyone, I'm Jordan Bowden. I'm a councillor for Roundhay Ward.
Hi, I'm Emma Flint from Wheatwood Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Helen Hayden, Temple Newson Ward and Executive Member for Children and Families, and thank you for those kind words, and I back them up. And isn't it lovely to have the graduations outside the window and see all the a huge congratulations to them, but it just reminds us as to why we do this job. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dan Barton, Deputy Director for Learning.
Good afternoon, everyone. Farah Khan, Deputy Director for Social Care.
Good afternoon, William Shaw, Head of Commissioning.
Good afternoon, Ben Finlay, Head of Service for Corporate Parenting.
Good afternoon, Councillor Ankela Manaka for Bermontos and Richmond Hill.
Good afternoon, Shan School, Third Sector Representative for Young's Life Leeds.
Good afternoon, Anna Sketo, Berani Governor.
Good afternoon, Councillor Tim Goodall for Headley and Hyde Park.
Good afternoon, Councillor Simon Seary from the Pudsey Ward, substituting for Ryan Stevenson.
Good afternoon, Councillor Rick Downs from Otley and Yeadon Ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Rob Clayton. I'm the Principal Scrutiny Advisor.
Thank you, everybody, for that. And can I say a particular thank you to Councillor Rowntree and Councillor Simon Seary for substituting today. And can we say a big welcome to Shanna's Gull for her first meeting at Children and Families, representing the Young Lives Leeds representative on the board, who's already given us some ideas of areas of focus for the coming year in the pre-meeting. So let us move to the agenda. And Rob, if you could take us, please, through items 1 to 5.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, just the procedural items that we do at the start of each meeting. So item 1 is appeals against refusal of inspection of documents, and there have been no appeals, Chair. Item 2 is items for exclusion from the public, and there have been no exclusions. Item 3 are late items of business, and there are no late items of business to report. Item 4 is declarations of interest, and I'll just pause briefly to allow any members to declare any interest under Leeds City Council Code of Conduct. I shall take silence as none. Item 5, Chair, is the apologies. As already mentioned by some board members, I'll just run through them. We have Councillor Simon Seary attending as substitute for Councillor Ryan Stevenson. We have Councillor Rowntree as a substitute for Councillor Martin, and we also have apologies from some of our co-opted members, Helen Bellamy, Tony Britton, Marie Adams. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Rob. That brings us to the minutes from our meeting on the 10th of June, which start at page 7 in your bundle. As usual, I will go through them one page at a time, hopefully not missing out any numbers and showing my numeracy issues. So starting with page 7, 8, 9. Yeah.
Can we just make sure that we follow up on the youth vaping? So as I understand it in the King's Speech, smoking and vaping has been included as a bill to replicate what was in the previous bill that fell when in dissolution of Parliament. So can we just make sure that we recognise that?
So you will note, turn your mic off. So if you look at page 11, resolved C, we as a board agreed to maintain a watching brief on the issue in light of the expected legislative changes following the general election and bring an update report back summarising the expected changes. So that is, do we agree that that is covered as written? Because that is that okay with you, David? Yeah? Or does something additional need to be added to the minutes?
Yeah, so it just, how does that actually happen?
So it will come back as a future agenda item. As it's in the work programme already in the work programme to come back. I think we said we'd give it, I have to check the recording. I think we said we were going to come back to it early next year. Yes. To see where matters were, but it's not going to fall. It is not going to fall off, as long as I'm chair anyway. It's not going to fall off the agenda until we see a green paper.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Jenkins. I did note it, and it's much later in the agendas for the January meeting in the work programme.
David, is that okay? Perfect. To page 10. I forgot where I got to. Page 11.
Sorry to be pedantic in a way. So on the Youth Justice Plan, one of my concerns is about the Wetherby Young Offenders Institute. So again, that's gone to the Safeguarding Board for discussion. And again, it's how that is reported back to the Scrutiny Board. Is that the same mechanism?
Can I be massively cheeky? That's at page 14.
Is it?
Can we possibly just wait till we get there?
Okay.
So I'm losing track altogether here now. I'm at page 11, 12. David's getting ready. 13, 14. Councillor Jenkins.
I repeat what I've said before.
Rob.
Thanks, Councillor Jenkins. Yeah, so it's actually, and Chair, it's further on than page 14, I hesitate to say, but referring to page 17 it is. There is on the Youth Justice Plan, there is a piece of work that I do in the background, which responds to the budget and policy framework. Now, as I understand it, that item is now delayed to later in the year, September. The joint inspection, or certainly it's been delayed. So I will be drafting correspondence through the chair to report the board's findings on that. That doesn't, though, bring it back as another item, I have to say. So,
John, to come back?
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Page 14 again. 15. 16. And finally, page 17. Can I thank Councillor Jenkins for being the first time in nearly a year that somebody's pulled us up during the minutes. It just shows that they've been properly read. That's good. Now, under our new procedures, because you remember we had a very active solicitor with us during our calling. We've learned some new things that we have to do. So would somebody care to propose the minutes as an accurate record? Thank you very much. And to second? Thank you very much. All in favour? Against? Abstentions? Thank you very much. That's carried. See? Proper. Right. That brings us to agenda item 7, which is Children Looked After Sufficiency Strategy. Can I remind colleagues that we have read the report, so there is no need to in detail reread it to us, and we are being quite tight and strict on timings today because we've got quite a lot to get through. So who's going to kick off for us?
Shall I just say a few opening words? So this report went to the June Executive Board and sets out how the Council will meet its statutory duty to ensure sufficiency of placements to meet the needs of children looked after. Priority is being given to increasing Leeds' own provision of family-based placements as well as residential homes in order to keep children in Leeds as much as we possibly can, and where it is safe and appropriate. Children do best when they're in the city, close to their families, friends, schools, communities and support networks. Having a strong sufficiency strategy is key to our efforts to address the challenge around rising numbers of children looked after and associated pressures from private residential costs, which have been seen in Leeds as well as regionally and nationally. So the report highlights the voices of children and young people with lived experience and our role as corporate parents in making sure we deliver on the promises we have made to them to help them thrive and succeed. Thank you.
Any officers coming in on this before we move to the board?
I've
Farah?
nothing to add in addition to that because people have read the report and we'll just take questions if that's okay, Chair.
Colleagues, questions? Jordan, you were gazing at me. Was that you wanting to ask a question or? Colleagues. Okay, I'll kick us off if I may. Oh, sorry. Go for it.
After you.
It's very kind of you. So just look at, obviously, the financial impact of not getting this resolved at pace is very significant. If we look ahead to when we're looking at budgetary figures, obviously there are significant issues coming through the pipeline. Can you speak to us a little bit about the pace of getting this implemented, barriers, and how we're going to tackle those?
Thank you. We have agreement already for 8 of our new children's homes, and I'm really pleased to be able to say that those are all identified now. 7 have been purchased and are owned by the council. 1 has an offer accepted pending the normal conveyancing. So delivery does take time to do. The challenge is not in the acquisition of the properties, the challenge is in the recruitment of the staff. We have a very wide-ranging approach to recruiting staff. So we have a rolling recruitment on our own website. We have worked through our PR and our comms conversations. We have word of mouth conversations, but critically, we also have a significant amount of work going on with one of our suppliers, recruitment suppliers. And we've just started a contract with a second recruitment supplier for them to recruit staff for us. So we've been quick in acquiring most of the properties. The last one took us a little bit longer than we would have liked. But nonetheless, it's not slowed down actual delivery. The challenge has been staffing, and what we've done with that is to be as agile and as quick as we can with it. We've reviewed the processes we have internally. We've made sure they're optimized. We've reviewed all our job profiles, our recruitment approach, and indeed our retention approach, our induction and training of staff. So there's been significant effort put into it. It has shown success. We've ended the use of agency staff within residential some time ago. We're now at the stage where we've recruited to the first hub. So that's the first 2 small group living homes. Well on our way to recruiting to the second. And we should have the third and the fourth sorted out by the end of the year. So we've made progress. That's given us the template for the changes and the further expansion that's anticipated as a result of this document. So I think we're in a good place with that. We know that we need not to be complacent. And so we will continue to review those processes, and we do have a review coming up of our induction processes because we implemented a new procedure at the beginning of the year. It's time to review whether that's being effective or not and fine tune that. But there's a range of approaches, Chair, that we've got in place to address that.
Thank you. So Emma and then Kaylee.
Yeah, I think that answered my initial question, but I don't know if this is like a separate question. I know this is a sufficiency thing, but I just think obviously the increase of kids is quite stark going in. Many years ago, my first job in Leeds was working at a contact centre run by NCH Action for Children. And I was just wondering about like contact for these kids with their parents or carers or family they've been removed from. And obviously the increase, how does that impact on contact? That's often really important. Obviously kids are in care for various reasons and some will still have contact with their families or the people that they lived with. So like, where is this contact happening? What's the quality of it and the opportunity, and what is the impact of the increase in numbers on it?
Thank you, Chair. I can come in on that. So we've really taken over years, we've learnt more about family time and the importance of that through national research, through local research, through what children and young people are telling us and parents are telling us. And we have a really strong arm of voice and influence in Leeds. Family time takes place of wherever is safe and natural to do so. So the priority is that it's natural for families. So some children have family time where family members come and visit them. Some go and visit family members. it's only supervised if it needs to be, where it needs another person there. Often that can happen in the early stages if children are looked after and there's court proceedings, etc. involved. But we try to move it on to a more natural environment. So for some children, they have extended family time in school holidays. Other children might see family members, and not just parents, but friends and family, siblings weekly. So it's really about an individual plan, and that's set out in the individual care plan for that child, and that's reviewed by the independent reviewing officer. So the child's voice is captured in there. We get really good feedback about family time. We've done a lot of work on maintaining links for children with their family members. Always looking at, as they get older, children naturally gravitate and will want more time. And what we don't want is for looked after children to have the stigma of appearing different to their to other children and other young people. So we're really positive about how we deliver family time and how we continue to deliver that for our social workers, for our staff. We ensure that they have training and delivery that's linked with the voice and influence team, so they understand the impact of family time on children. I visited our residential units that are already that we already have in place in Leeds, and young people were telling us about, somebody had been to the theatre to see not to the theatre, to a concert with their residential worker and with their parent as a celebration for completing GCSEs. Other children, so it varies on what that young person needs, but absolutely it's essential. What we know is that if you sever those links and don't promote them, young people suffer at the end. So I'm confident that as we expand our own resources and bring children back to Leeds, that will be easier, because when children are away from Leeds, it's harder for children and parents to see each other. So that will be a positive impact, an additional impact of bringing children back to Leeds.
Thank you. Ollie, so does anybody else wanted to come in? Sorry, go for it.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the, you've just mentioned about the 8 owned council properties that we are trying to get. I'm going back to page 12 and also comparing that to page 37, the increase by 7% and all that. And on page 12, we stating there that the pressures of children look after services and the growing costs, is that gonna bring our cost really down, and do we know how many the houses can take in terms of children looked after? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we provide better quality care in Leeds, and that's a lower unit cost than the private sector alternative. So part of the drive to bring our own homes online is to improve outcomes for children. All but one of our homes in this cycle have been again assessed as good or outstanding by Ofsted. That follows on from last year, where we only had 2 that were assessed as RI. So we provide good quality care for children in their city. We provided at a unit cost price that's significantly lower than the private sector equivalent. So the opportunity that the pressure creates is to create more of our own provision in the city and improve outcomes for children at a better price. So it has a positive impact on both ways.
That's great news. Thank you.
Ollie.
Thank you, Chair. And just about the children's homes, I can say that I've been to a number of them with Ben, and they are extremely impressive. I think for all of us as ward representatives, if there are homes within our wards or proposed homes within our wards, I would strongly encourage people to engage in that process and to provide support that we can as part of that, because it is hugely beneficial, and it is very much in the interests of those children and young people. The staff there are doing an excellent job, and it was quite inspiring. So I've got two questions. So one of them is about reducing placement breakdown, which I know we've talked about extensively, and particularly when we think about newer foster carers, and how we can not only encourage more people to become foster carers, but also how we can retain people. And one of the things I know we've discussed is about ways in which we can use and utilise some of the knowledge of older or more experienced foster carers, and particularly those who maybe aren't foster carers now. And I can think of people that I've had conversations both in my wards and also indeed some of my neighbours as well, who have many years of experience as foster carers. And I think it would be very helpful for us to think about how we can use that knowledge in terms of informal support, and not only in terms of interaction with the young people, but also in terms of interaction with new foster carers as well. Because I think one of the things that's highlighted both on page 35 in terms of some of the feedback and also conversations within corporate parenting boards is how important those relationships are to younger people. So I think I'd be interested to hear more about what opportunities there may be for informal mentoring, because I think reducing breakdown, placement breakdown is hugely beneficial for all concerned. So that's the first question around reducing breakdown. The other question is around unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and the question is perhaps more of a political one to Councillor Hayden, around discussions that we can have with central government, given that we have had a change of government, given that this is an area that crosses a number of different policy areas. It's not only something around children and families. I think there's a huge amount about integration longer term, and I know that the Shadow Home Office team, the former Shadow Home Office team, were very interested in the integration side of this as well. And so I think politically, and from a policy point of view, we need to think about integration longer term when it comes to unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. So what discussions are there with central government about that? And also what discussions are there in terms of getting more support with this? I don't think the previous government was particularly receptive to this agenda for various reasons. I think we need to have those conversations now, and some of that's for officers and some of that's for politicians. Thank you.
Perhaps if I respond on the point about placement stability and then a little bit about how we support our unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And just to preface what I was going to say, Councillor was quite right. We have a number of homes across the city, and each home has a link member who's agreed normally through the corporate parenting board, one of the local ward members, to be a link member for that children's home. As we grow the estate, we will want more elected members to be link members for those children's homes, and I'd really encourage colleagues to take up that opportunity. It's a really great way of supporting that home, working with the neighbours in that home, and building relationships in the community, which is really valuable for the home and for the young people who live there. In terms of placement stability, you're absolutely right. The support for the care that a child's receiving is critical, and often both the foster carers or the home that's looking after that may need additional support from outside of their immediate environment. We have a number of strands that we've put in place to try to increase to prevent the likelihood of a child's care ending and where they live finishing and having to change suddenly. So we have started to do work across the whole of our corporate parenting services about a common practice model. And it's referenced in the report, we're using a model called dyadic developmental psychotherapy, and we're tying that to another model called PACE, both of which think about the attachment a child forms with their carers and thinks about the child's behaviour in the context of the trauma that they've had, and shows warmth and empathy for the child. So a core language about understanding a child's behaviour. And then we have in process the development of some very specific placement support offers, and we have a team that we're setting up. And then we're working with our wider partners through the corporate parenting board and through other relationships with our partners in health, in education, and indeed in the third sector, in thinking about what services we can bring together to support those young people and the people who look after them, so that those young people experience really solid, stable care throughout their childhood. And where we want to be is in a position where children go to live in a setting, it's the right one first time, and they stay there. And that's our ambition, so that they don't experience an unplanned end to where they live. And that's something we've talked about through the corporate parenting board as a priority. Just to mention briefly, just in terms of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, we have a number of those young people that we look after currently in foster placements, in our own residential care and in supported accommodation. And there's a significant amount of work to support them, to understand their journey and understand the experiences they've had, and also to support them in terms of their engagement with education, with learning in community. Those young people have shown interest in a huge range of things, but perhaps something closest to my heart is one of our young people who plays cricket at quite a high level. I'm a bit of a cricket fan, and it's wonderful to see a young person really starting to take part in our community and get engaged with our life through his school, through his education, and really showing some promise with that. But I'll stop there, and Councillor Hayden.
Thank you, Ben, and for everything all the work you do. Yeah, I haven't had conversations per se. The government's only 2 weeks old, but in that time we've already seen a real shift. And one of the in kind of in approach and in attitude, and I think that was shown yesterday when the Prime Minister set up the Child Poverty Task Force, because underlying all these, the main reason why, in my humble opinion, why we have an increase in children looked after is the poverty that 4 million children are living in, and the inability of their families to cope in a very challenging environments when you can't afford to look after your children. So so that's already been the conversations that have been around the McAllister report, and of course Josh McAllister is now a Labour MP. So we will see a real culture shift in terms of fully implementing that report, and we in Leeds are very well placed to do that. They're very interested. When they were like the government in waiting, they were very interested in what we do in Leeds as an outstanding authority, and the fact that we have maintained outstanding, which is very, very difficult to do because you've got to keep improving, and we are the only core city to be outstanding and to have maintained it as well. So yep, those conversations are going on, and we'll happily feed into the work of the Child Poverty Task Force and see if we can make a real change to the lives of those 4 million children, which is immoral. If I can't think of any other word, that 4 million children are living in poverty in the 5th or 6th richest country in the world. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I will remind, I've got to let other people come in, Ollie. I will remind colleagues, we are very strictly apolitical here. That is the role of scrutiny. I will delegate. That said, I think that was just about by the narrowest of hairbreadths, just about on the right side of the line, and we're a long way from any elections. Thank goodness. Nonetheless, I think it is well for me to remind that scrutiny is an apolitical process. But I think a delicate reminder is all that's necessary. Jordan.
Yeah, first, just a quick statement. Really, really positive to see the speed at which these 8 homes have been brought in place. It didn't seem that long ago when the plan was initially announced. The eight new homes, though, how does that because I'm presuming they're all different sizes, how does that translate into the amount of children that are being brought into this internal provision? And equally, of those children that are coming in, what's the sort of the breakdown of that? Are they coming in all from external provision, or is it somewhere it's part of newly identified children who we're going to have to bring in, where the situation at home is broken down? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We've as you mentioned, we've acquired, well, I think we've acquired the 8th property, but we have the other 7. At the same time, we've also been preparing for registration a complex needs children's home, which will accommodate 4 children. And we've also acquired an additional home, which will work with 5 children. So we have 8 homes in the small group living programme. Those are 2-bed children's homes each. And then we have an additional 5 and 4 coming on stream. What we're trying to do more strategically is to grow the variety in our offer. So we have 7 4-bed homes, already, and those 8 2-beds and potential for that to increase to give us more variety, and in particular to provide a care setting where young people have to form fewer relationships. So a care setting that's more typical of a family setting. So 1 or 2, you're living on your own or with another child, you're working with 1 or 2 adults at a time. And so the young people that will do best in there are young people who perhaps are struggling in care homes or care settings where there's a larger number of young people and a larger number of staff as a result. Now, quite a few of those young people will be living in placement or living in care already, and we will have them in a setting that we think which we're happy with, but we think they can do better if they come back to Leeds. Or their very expressed wish is to come back to Leeds, and where we can, we want to work with young people around their wishes and their feelings to do that. So most of the young people that will go into those settings will be young people that we already look after and we already know, and we have a clear idea of who those young people are, although that does change week to week as young people's lives change and the pressures change in terms of what we need to provide. Inevitably, there may be young people who come into our care in the period with those homes open and having a vacancy who we think it makes sense to come straight into those homes. And essentially what we're trying to do is to balance the provision with the needs of the young person and the offer across the estate. So we're trying to have more variety across the estate. The idea being that the more difference we have, the more likely you are to have the right niche for that young person ready for them to take up. So it will be a mixture, predominantly young people who we already know and look after and we want to bring back to Leeds, but potential for a small number to be young people who are new to care. It will just depend on exactly the makeup of their needs.
Brilliant. Sounds really promising. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to add to that. Ben mentioned earlier staffing, but also we have to register the homes as well and go through the registration process as well. And the needs of children change weekly. So while we try to move them in a planned way, we might get an emergency where we might have a home that can take 2 children. There might be situations where actually at that time it's only appropriate for 1 child to be there because the lives of children change. So while this gives an overview of how many we can accommodate in the homes at any one time, that depends on the needs of specific children at the time, so that can fluctuate as well.
Thank you. Ray.
Hi, Ben. My question, obviously you're moving to more houses, so you're going to need more staff. I think that would be a fair assumption. My concern is retention, basically, because I'm aware most people can earn more in the private sector. So how are we trying to make sure that we keep our staff? I'm genuinely concerned about that. And I think that's a difficulty because moving staff around with young people, they get used to people, then they suddenly move on. That's a concern to me. So I'm interested to look at how we're trying to keep our retention at the highest rate possible.
Absolutely, retention is a key challenge for us, and as we grow, that will scale up. It'll become a bigger challenge. So it's absolutely something we're very focused on. So there's a range of responses to how we make working for Leeds the thing that people want to do. We have a competitive pay and remuneration package. So when we put into it not only our pay and our typical earnings as opposed to our staff will receive additional payments for working weekends, for working and social hours. There's occasionally opportunity for overtime. So the pay package itself is attractive. It comes with a public sector pension, which is a very significant reason for people coming and then staying, and it's important to emphasise the staying part of that. And then working for Leeds, there's a range of support that comes through our employee support programme, that comes through being in a public sector employee that looks after its staff, that supports its staff when they're pregnant, that supports its staff when they're poorly, that supports its staff through their journey with us. We have and are developing and need to go further, but I have the start of a really strong training package and support package and development package. So as a service that's growing and expanding, you have the opportunity to come and start work for us today, to do a couple of years experience as a practitioner, to get promotion to a senior, to a deputy and to a registered manager. And that's feasible within 6, 7 years of starting. A registered manager is a well-paid role. So we offer a very solid career path for people. So you've got the opportunity to progress. And fundamentally, I'm committed to our residential staff being supported to have a high degree of training and support. They are providing care day in, day out, minute in, minute out to children with really significant and complex needs. And they need to be trained and skilled and equipped and supported by a team around them. And I think actually what that will do is it will create an interesting and stimulating work environment. And fundamentally, what we want is work to be rewarding. We want the provision of care to be rewarding, and we want it to be rewarding for staff to do. So we look for opportunities. So today I've come from one of our, we have a conference running today for all of our staff. It's the second. We do them half one day and half another day, and that's part of a package of bringing staff together, of working together as a team, of celebrating our successes, having input and training from external colleagues coming in. So essentially trying to create a well-remunerated, well-supported and interesting working environment where staff are enabled and supported to provide really good care for children, and that in its own right is a significant motivator.
I think you answered that very well. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Final question on this item, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Ben, you mentioned a bit earlier about the cost of care, providing care is higher in the private sector with private provision than what we can do ourselves. And obviously that is one of the drivers behind us acquiring and establishing new children's homes. I just wondered if you could flesh this out a bit in terms of the metrics. Now, obviously, different models of care and provision for different children. Not all costs are going to be the same, but is there anything that you can share in terms of metrics, the kind of figures that like percentage difference, whether there's particular kinds of care of which it's more true than others, certain types where private provision is more appropriate, that kind of thing? Thank you.
Yeah, and William might want to come in here too. As you're right to say, there's a variety of care, and so there isn't exact like for like. What we can say is that our costs per head in the private sector are, I think, around 40% higher than our cost per head that we deliver at. Although there is some challenge in there in terms of capturing fully the cost and understanding fully the cost, but there is a significant variation in there. There's a lot that comes down to your occupancy rates. So we have to deliver as an occupancy rate for our unit cost to be relevant. And obviously, if we aren't able to, that changes our unit cost and that changes that relationship. So at its best, it's quite strong. But what we also have is the opportunity, and we start from wanting to improve outcomes for young people. So that's where this starts from, that we provide better care. And then we're in a good position where we provide care at a better price. So sometimes providing better care means providing it at a higher price. So we may need to have a provision where a young person lives on their own for a while. That means that those other beds in the home aren't being used. That puts the overall cost of that child's care up. So it's not a straightforward, it costs this here and it costs that there. There's a range and there's a range of complexity within it.
There's real challenges in the national market in terms of residential. As has already been mentioned, Joss McAllister talked to that in his care review, talked about a broken market. What we find in the external private market is costs are escalating. They're escalating significantly, and there's pressures on places. What we find often in the private market is they don't manage the risk and the complexity as well as we do internally. So where there is challenges, where there is complexity, and when that puts pressure in those homes, that can mean an increased cost to us as a local authority, where internally we're able to wrap around the support to our homes, to our staff, to our children far better than we can in the private market. So we are working with our private providers. There are some really good private providers, those that are based in Leeds as well, but particularly due to the cost, the pressure on the places and how they manage risk, it's the importance of having that internal provision as well and developing that further.
Thanks, that's very helpful. And your 40%, that's a very significant figure, obviously. Yeah, thank you very much for that.
So thank you very much for that. Our recommendation on this matter is that we are asked to note and comment on the children looked after sufficiency strategy and identify future areas where scrutiny activity might take place and add value to the work being undertaken by the Children and Family Directorate, which I think we've just done. I will propose that. Would anyone care to second that? Thank you very much. Those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. Still getting used to this strange legal officers. Great. That takes us to agenda item 8, changes to funding for inclusion. Can I just formally note thanks, Councillor Scopes, I see scrutiny chairs always work together, actually flagged this up as something that he felt really needed some extra eyes being brought to bear on this. And can I thank officers for bringing this report today, because it does give some additional information which is really helpful. So who's going to kick us off on this?
I can go again. So thank you to Scrutiny for asking for this paper. You know, when you review something, when you're working on something like the EHCP, the health and care plans, it can be that we know what's happening, but it's quite right that it should be explained and it should be further investigated by Scrutiny and by colleagues. So historically, funding for inclusion was seen as best practice, and the principle of getting funds to schools to ensure that children with special educational needs and disabilities are given the support as early as possible, and that early intervention is a good one. Having said that, legislation and the statutes have moved on, and therefore we need to now look at moving to a solely educational health care plan model, where and so over the next 4 years we will move our children and young people on FFI funding will move across to being assessed by for an EHCP. I apologise for using acronyms. It's like, you know, I hope everybody knows. I know everybody at home knows then what I'm referring to. So that will take 4 years. We will start with we're starting with the transitional years. So children going into from reception into year 1, year 6, year 11, and then following all the years, because they're the most important years, because they're moving institutions often, and also moving schools or going to college. Or so we're going to start with those first. It will take 4 years. There's quite a large amount of children that have funding for inclusion, and so that process is planned so it's not overwhelming in what is already a difficult situation with a lack of educational psychologists, etc. And historically, the number of EHCPs that we've been getting through within the 20-week time frame. So I'll leave it there. I don't know whether Dan wants to say anything.
Thank you. I think all I would really add is to say that, first of all, thank you to Scrutiny for having us back to have a bit more of a detailed conversation. I welcome any advice and support that we can get around moving this forward in a positive way. I think I would just add that we are working in a very complex and challenging context and system with a lot of moving parts and some real challenges around resource. We are keeping the children and young people at the very centre of what we do, and we will not make any changes that are going to be to the detriment of children receiving support. I'm happy to take what I anticipate will be quite a lot of questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to kick off with just a couple of questions, I think, just to try and get some clarity and perhaps shine a light on why this is a real concern. So there are over 5,000 young people in Leeds who receive FFI, which is funding for inclusion. And the Leeds tradition has been that we don't necessarily require young people to have EHCPs to access funding for inclusion. That may go some of the way to explaining why Leeds has about half the number of EHCPs as other core cities. And we are well practiced in this board and understanding the issues that Leeds is having along with others, in terms of the EHCP process. So worry number one is this is a significant additional burden onto a system that we on this board and officers and everyone knows is already struggling. And so I understand the 4 years question, is that really long enough? There's a reason, there's another reason I say that. My biggest concern here is, and it's something I flagged up earlier, is around 30% of young people currently receiving FFI funding will not qualify for an educational healthcare plan. The threshold to get an EHCP is significantly higher than to access FFI funding. Now that is out of our control, but what we have correctly recognised is that certain vulnerable learners need funding that is not there within schools. And I have written on numerous occasions to the former government shouting about that together with colleagues. So I shall do the same to this government too, to say that, you know, there are issues around that. Schools need better funding, but the fact is we have said schools can't afford, and therefore we will give FFI to meet that gap. That 30% of young people represents about 1,500 young people who are going to lose their funding at some point, and schools will not be able to magically make up that gap. So can we have some, what's the reassurance? Dan has helpfully said no young person is going to lose their funding, but I don't think that can be right. So if I am if I have a year 1 student, my 4 years takes me to year 5. What about years 6 to year 13? So just some reassurance around that, because those two areas are real concerns, both for schools, and I speak as a governor of 4 of them, to parents, and I speak as a dad of a young person with an EHCP and profound learning disability, and school budgets. So just some assurance around those.
Thank you, Chair. There's obviously a few questions there which I'll try to do my best to answer. I'll start though by just repeating that reassurance that despite, I mean, we have no choice, and I think it's clear in the paper that from a legal perspective, we have to start to make a move from one system to the other within the current legislative framework. We are otherwise exposed to legal risk and challenge to the council, which isn't acceptable. The question as to whether 4 years is long enough is dependent on a number of variables. We need to get going and see, and we will need to be alert to any challenges of the sort that you've described in terms of the ability of the system to cope, and we will make adjustments to that in response to how it's working. But what we can't do is not set off on that journey. And so is 4 years long enough? Well, with the calculations that we've done, that we've checked the resources that we have currently, we're recruiting to vacancies in the SENSAP team, we're recruiting to vacancies in the education psychology team. We have a raft of productivity improvements, which we've talked to actually in a previous scrutiny session in relation to the use of IT and improved systems. All of those things will be supportive. So at the moment, we think that 4 years is long enough, but I acknowledge that we must be alert to the possibility of needing to flex in order that we don't tip the system over and actually prejudice the experience of children currently outside of the system without support being able to go through in a timely way. So the first point I would say is that one, we have to start and we have to be flexible. 4 years we think is long enough, but we will have to flex. And I'll repeat my assurance that we won't take away funding just because an FFI period has run out if we aren't confident that the children that do need to progress through the system to move to an EHCP won't be able to. So we will only remove one type of funding when the other type of funding is ready and an assessment has been carried out. To the second piece around 30% of children, what we cannot do is prejudge the outcome of a statutory assessment. So we have to make some assumptions, obviously, but ultimately, so whether it's 30% or 20% or 60 or 5 who will ultimately of children who will ultimately not be receiving an FFI package, we don't know what that will be. Neither do we know what the level of support that will be determined by the assessment will be either. So, and we don't know what the cost will be. So we're doing our best to try and figure that out, but we can't tell what the actual results will be. I've said in the paper, we think it's reasonable to assume that there won't be any reduction for those children who do automatically progress through to assessment in terms of the level of funding that they will receive to give them the provision to meet the need. There was something that you said there about, Chair, the money isn't in schools, and you're right. However, in Leeds, we are significantly more generous in terms of the amount of funding that we provide to schools. And if you're a head teacher, you may very well disagree, but from different parts of the country, we already give significant chunks, blocks of funding in addition to the 3 bands, so the pupil unit, the notional SEND funding, and the top up. In many cases where there is a proportion of children with the HCPs in the school above a certain threshold, we give blocks of £6,000 of funding to the school in recognition of the additional pressure that creates. That is over and above what is given as part of the conditions of grant and the operational guidance nationally. And I appreciate I'm going on a bit, but it was quite a big question. I want to make sure that I try and answer it. We have to make sure that we're compliant with the legal guidance as it stands at the moment, and not wishing to, prejudge or guess any potential future legislation that comes in. Although I note that is certainly a priority nationally. I suppose the point I was driving at there is when we get to a point where children who are currently in receipt of provision funded by FFI, who go through an assessment and who don't meet the threshold for whatever reason, then it will be rightly for the school to fund the provision to meet those children's needs from within their notional funding. And that is the choice that we have to make based on what is set out in the legislation and code of practice now. And that is the same for every authority in the country. We may disagree with that. We may wish that we had the money to provide the support differently, but we have to try and fit within the system statutorily as it is articulated now.
Thank you. So you gave an assurance at the top, but actually your assurance was very narrow in its application, which is the bit I want to focus on. Sorry. So the 30% assumption of young people that may not qualify, who may not meet in the HCP threshold, obviously comes from the taking the 70% that we think will, that's contained in the paper. So, and my experience probably leads me to suggest that it's probably about right. It might be a bit higher, it might be a bit lower, but roughly that it feels right. If I have understood what you have said correctly, there is likely to come a point in time where Leeds is going to say, pupil A, you have not qualified for an EHCP, and therefore you will no longer receive any additional funding other than the notional funding that school has within its budget. That is correct, isn't it?
Not entirely. So there couple of things that are set out in the paper which I need to draw your attention to and the board's attention to. Ostensibly, there are three ways. There is one way of funding additional needs above notional funding, that is through an EHCP and the top-up funding that it tracks. So if a child doesn't qualify for top-up funding, then it is to the school to provide the additional support. However, there is set out in the paper the overview of the environmental fund, which we talked about previously, which is where rather along the same lines as how we provide additional blocks of funding for schools where there is a high proportion of children with an EHCP, we are entitled to do the same thing for schools as settings where there are high proportions of children with additional needs which have been identified but which are below the threshold to access an EHCP. Now, the thinking around that is still in its infancy, and we have been doing that really as part of our involvement with the Change Programme Partnership. We're referring to it as an environmental fund. The reason that we are able to do that is because we won't be giving funding which is specifically attached to an individual child, rather to a setting in recognition of the increased pressure that a larger volume of children in any particular school who have got identified needs but below the threshold of an EHCP might bring. So it doesn't necessarily follow that a child who currently has FFI now, if they don't meet the threshold for an EHCP, won't get any additional funding other than that which is within the notional budget for the school, because there are many schools within the city where there is a significant proportion of children with identified needs which is above the average, because for all sorts of reasons which we don't have time to go into now, we tend to get coalescing groups of children in different schools. But that will mean that we have a vehicle to provide funding from the same financial envelope, but without compromising our legal duties as I've articulated them.
Thank you. I will bring other colleagues in a minute. I just want to clarify something. So it's absolutely right that under the legislation, we need to have a plan. I don't think the legislation actually says a backstop date, unless I've missed that bit. But so the important thing is what we are doing is that we have a plan. So it's really reassuring to hear that we're going to have flexibility, although setting a time frame out does make sense. I absolutely accept that. It's also then reassuring to hear that the 1,500 young people, if their funding were to stop, if their setting can demonstrate essentially that they would have undue hardship because they have an excessive, that's a wrong word, I don't like that word, a larger number than average of young people with learning vulnerabilities, and therefore a need that falls below an EHCP threshold but is still evidenced, they will be able to apply for funding, and we will apply a common sense, I hope, approach to that. Is that an accurate summation before I then bring colleagues in?
It very much is, and you took a lot less time to say it than I did, so thank you.
I was just building on what you said. I was doing the exact thing that politicians normally don't do, which is I'm summarising. That's the lawyer in me. I'll bring colleagues in now if they have any questions. And Kelly, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I think you both kind of like touched on what I wanted to go over. I'll go back to page 12, regards to the FFI. Dan, you've kind of like touched on the complexities of the criteria itself. And I think today when I got the package and I was reading through it at home, I had a question. Also, standing as a mom of a special educational need child who doesn't have, the EHCP, and she won't even qualify for it. I'm now kind of like thinking, with the shift that we're doing now, are we not going to, kind of like make it worse than it is? But you've now touched on how the move is going to be like. So my question now is, at the moment, do we have a criteria as we mentioned, that it's going to be carefully prioritized list of children. Do we know what the criteria is? And I know that this is not something that one size fits all. When we speak SEND, it is so complex. I know about it, and I've gone through it from month one, I think, of month 2, 3 of my child, and I knew something was not right. And it takes the doctors and everybody they take forever to get there with you, and sometimes they don't even get it. So with us moving this funding, do we have a criteria as to how carefully prioritizing are we going to be on this?
So thank you. Yes, we do. We are, and the paper sets out some of the broad priority kind of areas that we're looking at. So children who are currently looked after, for example, are at the very top of the list for obvious reasons. And then we are looking at phase transfer, again, as Councillor Hayden said, for obvious reasons, because it's really important that children move into different settings with absolute clarity from the setting and for the children and the family of how their needs are going to be met. There are a couple of other things that we will look at in terms of age or complexity of need, again, set out in the paper. So I think we're really clear that we are targeting the transition for those children with the most significant vulnerabilities first.
Thanks. Ollie.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Dan. I had a bit more, I had a question around some of those conversations with the families and also with the children and young people themselves. So reading on page 55 about looked after children being the first priority group. So my question was about those conversations with those children and young people. So how will they be involved as part of this? How will those conversations take place? So I think looked after children, those conversations are particularly important and they need to be handled sensitively. I would also add as well, when we're thinking about other children and young people with potential vulnerabilities in their families, how will those conversations happen? For example, where there are parents who have English as an additional language, where there are parents who may have other challenges or difficulties. I'm aware that there will be some parents who will be very vocal and who will not hesitate to approach us as councillors and other elected representatives and officials. But I'm thinking particularly about some of those people who would maybe struggle to engage with the system, who might lack the confidence to do so. How will those conversations be conducted? I think it would be helpful to know more about that and how those parents and young people will be supported through the process.
Thank you. So there's a few questions there which I'll try to answer in order. In terms of how we have conversations with children and young people as part of the process is helpfully sort of set out really in the spirit of the 2014 legislation, which was really one of the main themes running through that was about agency and was about the conversation with the child or young person. So helpfully the process for assessing and then understanding need and capturing the voice of the child within the articulation and creation of an education healthcare plan is set out in the code of practice. So I think once the button is pressed around requesting an assessment, that is part of and parcel of what we do, the conversations that we have through the school with the SENCO, with our education and healthcare plan coordinators, involves the child at every step and seeks to try to capture their views, whether they are able to articulate them or whether they are pre-verbal. We work very hard with our education psychology team as well, and our specialist advisory teacher team, particularly for children with sensory needs, to capture their views. In terms of the move into an EHCP process away from a current provision, we will have to work with schools at that point. The schools in our city and other settings are the places where the professionals are who have the relationships with the families in a way that we don't and could never have, because the children spend all their time at school and the relationship is broadly with the school. So it will be through the process will be done in partnership with the SENCOs in the schools and the head teacher, and where there are children perhaps whose parents struggle to understand what's going on, or who we find it hard to engage with because we that's our problem, not theirs. We need to work with the school to develop what the mechanisms are, and they will be different for every family. I think the point is the process is sort of being planned now. I don't really have the detailed breakdown of exactly how we'll approach that. And so what I'm telling you is what I think the answer will be. So for example, in September, with the first tranche of children, we will provide the communications that SENCOs need to send out. We will provide the kind of frequently asked questions and everything else that will kind of move that on. I think you probably want to come back. So, I mean, I've got a bit more here around how we support you as councillors to field responses to any questions. I think that's a really good question, and I think we need to make sure that we provide you all and members not in the room with a crib sheet and a kind of rationale and some perhaps set answers to types of question which might be helpful.
Thank you. I will be very concise, Chair. So as I understand, quite a lot of those conversations will be happening through the schools. I mean, one of my concerns, and I'm sure it's shared by other people as well, is around the differences that parents have in terms of their interactions with schools. So I'm sure we will all have had conversations with parents who have a very positive experience of the support that they've received through schools, but there are also other parents who have had a less positive experience, and my concern is around it's around some of those conversations, and we know how sensitive these issues are, and so particularly where some of those relationships have not been as good as they could have been. I think it's really important that that there are ways for those conversations to happen, and so yes, absolutely, it should primarily go through schools, but I do also think there needs to be some follow-up to make sure that people are getting consistent information, and to make sure that any concerns that people have and any support that's needed is identified early on, and it's not simply left to the schools and those conversations between schools and parents, especially where relationships are fractured.
I think that's a really excellent point. And the way we would always do something like this is to take a generic approach initially, for which would apply and work for the majority. And in the cases that you sort of given exemplars of it, in terms of families where a relationship might not be particularly highly functioning with the school, we will take that on separately, provide the opportunity to meet with parents directly and work through that with them. It will be a different approach for each of those different families that you're talking about.
Thanks. Tim.
Thank you. The minutes of the last meeting mentioned the pressure points in terms of educational psychologists, and you mentioned recruitment. In terms of rough estimates, in terms of head counts or FTE, if we're going from what we've got now to ideal, what would the ideal head count be, and what will we have in terms of if we recruit?
So that's a dangerous question to ask me, given our financial situation. I'd love to have twice as many education psychologists. I'd love to have 3 times as many, because I'd like to dedicate the majority of our EdSpsych resource to early help work, to support schools and teachers and SENCOs and families and children to get things right in the classroom as soon as possible, so that in many cases we can meet need at the earliest point that they manifest, and we therefore take away the escalation in need and demand and unmet need, which then makes an EHCP increasingly necessary. So it's an interesting question. I mean, ultimately, I'd like as many as I can have. I think we probably need to increase the size of the team in the long term, but we've got a number of vacancies that we're recruiting to, which will add materially to the capacity that we have currently. And there are, as I've mentioned, kind of productivity wins that we can get out of changing the way that we capture all of the advice and understanding and knowledge about a child's needs that currently sits within a school that we don't always capture as part of the assessment process. So there are marginal gains effectively that we will benefit from as part of the whole of the transformation process. I would like to have lots more education psychologists.
Thank you. Thank you. David.
Yeah, so my point is on page 54, which is about the Parent Carer Forum. And I just wondered whether you could give any feedback as to how that went. And just on a side point, I was in my primary school where I'm a governor this morning and spoke to two mine-mate workers. And I said, have you ever used or told your parents about the special needs jungle? And they hadn't heard of the special needs jungle. But so I'd recommend the special needs jungle. It's a fantastic website run by parents. And so I'm always surprised about that. Okay.
So the question about how it's going with in terms of the conversations with and engagement with the PCF in the city. We've started from a particular place, and that relationship is growing across all of the conversations that we have with them. To some, I think they have been pleased that we're engaging with them, that we want to, that they have been happy to share briefings and information about this across their network, and that will continue to grow and build. I think the transparency and the openness and the honesty that we have approached this with have been gratefully received. We had a meeting with about 70 or 80 parents last week to ask them in very broad terms about their experiences of SEND in the city. And the aim really in doing that is to ensure that they have access to the leadership of SEND in the city and they get the chance to have their voices heard. That is the first of what I know will be a series of conversations going forward. So that provides us with the opportunity not just to talk to the forum, who are representatives, but parents and carers themselves about their lived experience now. And so that meeting was very difficult because we were hearing some really challenging stories about how things are at the moment. All the more reason to continue to do those because it's incredibly valuable intelligence, and it also creates fosters an atmosphere of trust. We're not there yet, but we will get there. So I think it's been received well that we've been communicating. Special Needs Jungle is out there. And there is a lot of information in there which parents are entitled to access. We have the local offer in the city, which is our kind of curated signposting site for all of the information, advice and guidance that's out there. Not everything on Special Needs Jungle is necessarily always accurate. And I think it's important that parents and carers are judicious and temper what they say and hear and the information that they receive with a careful reading. I suppose I'm trying to be a little bit diplomatic. I think these sites are full of really, really, really good information, but not all of it is always correct. And it can sometimes be unhelpful because we need to talk to each other here rather than going to a national site sometimes.
Sorry, Karen, go for it. So that was Mike. Go, Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask, is there a balance between all the academies throughout the city, or are there some that are more communicative and are willing to take on board advice from the authority, or are there some that are a bit reluctant to involve the local authority? Because the two boards I'm on easily blame the local authority for anything that goes wrong. So if there's any funding issues, it's the local authority's fault, even though they're academies. So I just wondered if there were anything, or was it more popular within certain areas of the city than others? And whereabouts are those issues
So I don't think it's particularly popular anywhere, to be honest, because we're making a change from a position which has been accepted and has been the status quo for a long time to a new one. So I don't think it's particularly popular, but I wouldn't make one. I take as I find, and I haven't in the 6 months that I've been here found any difficulty approaching any head teacher or principal on receiving any kind of feedback or response, whether they be a head teacher or principal of an academy or a maintained school. There are always, in any local authority footprint, schools who are easier or harder to reach for a combination of different reasons. I've not had any barriers at all put up since I've arrived.
Clear that, Chair. Thank you.
Shanaz.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if you were aware of, or has it been monitored when funding has been allocated, if it's actually been used on that child? Because we work with a lot of families who are and professionals who recognise that, for example, a £6,000 has been allocated, but it's not been used, or we're not being able to use it. For example, if we wanted to buy a laptop to work with the individual to provide additional support, it's been refused. So I was just wondering, has it actually been monitored, and are you aware if that funding that's been drawn down has been used on that individual and that support has been provided?
That's a really excellent question. It's a question that every local authority will have trouble with, because the number of EHCPs at the moment are over 5,000 and soon to be many thousands more than that. It is completely impossible to accurately monitor in a sort of contract management commissioning way whether or not the commitments that are in an EHCP are being delivered, other than through the vehicle of the annual review process. So it's through the annual review, which is run by schools, and on occasion, where needs are of a particular level, attended by professionals from the local authority or the health service or from social care, or a combination, that we would have that discussion. But in terms of a monitoring of the funding and in terms of how it's spent, the system has been set up in such a way as to make that effectively not impossible, but extremely hard to do it with any degree of confidence. I'm pleased to say that we have a system in which we have more than 250 highly professional, valued head teachers and SENCOs and school system across the piece, where we have a high degree of professional trust and confidence that at least the content of the HCP is being delivered, if not above and beyond. But in any case where there's a concern that isn't happening, I would always encourage parents or carers to report that to our team, because once we know that there's a concern, we can pick it up and have a conversation and put in a challenge.
Thank you for that. No, the colleagues have indicated. Thank you. I think it was a really important piece to bring today. The reassurance in terms of the flexibility on the time is really welcome. I think it's really important that we recognise that, to put it into numbers, it could be around 50 pieces of casework per ward where there is a risk of young people no longer having funding at some point in the future. And they will be incredibly emotive pieces of casework. And so I think it's really, some of the reassurances are welcome, but I think we need to be alive to the fact that there are likely going to be a significant number of young people who may not, in the fullness of time, obviously time will also have an impact on that as well, but who may not in the fullness of time, yeah, you can come in and say, have that funding. I just think we need to be really alive to how we deal with the communication around that, how we support those families through that and support the schools. And so the reassurance around the environmental fund is really welcome as well. Yeah, you want to come in?
Yeah, it was really just to comment along the lines of I fully acknowledge that within the city of Leeds, we're very fortunate in some ways that we do get high proportions of money. We have this FFI system that we've had for quite a time, which cannot continue. But the net result of when this system has worked its way through is that provision for children with special needs in mainstream schools is going to be even more challenging than it is now. And I find day to day, it is the single most challenging factor in schools. And to come back to the point there that my colleague was making about perhaps parents raising issues of, is the money being spent in the right direction? In my experience, for our highest tariff children, whilst we are grateful for the levels of FI that come into school, I can say, with the school that primarily concerns me, with the level of support that those children need, we are backfilling that financial support to the tune currently of over £30,000 to fully meet their needs. So I think more ordinarily, it wouldn't be a question, is that money being spent? It's how much of the rest of the school budget is being spent on backfilling to meet the needs of individuals, where FFI does not go anywhere to meet those needs. And very often the money you might get equates for maybe support for 3 days a week. And that might be for a child who is pre-verbal, doesn't even access national curriculum, is not in the classroom. So what do we do with them for the other 2 days? Well, we have to continue to try to meet that need. So it has to be backfilled from within what is a depleting school resource. And certainly in my situation, if I go back 2 years, I would say that the classes in my school had a teaching assistant to meet the needs of those children pretty much every day, certainly for half a day, for more than half a day. As of September, we will be reduced to a teaching assistant for one for the whole of Key Stage 2. And one for Key Stage 1, not taking into account the need for special needs children, but the reduction over a couple of years is quite breathtaking. And we're certainly not the only school that sit in that position.
Thanks for that. I think it's noteworthy. Pretty much across the council, we took the last government to task about a choice they made to not give Leeds the full allocation of higher needs funding that it was entitled to. It was a disgrace, and we told them that. I hope that in that vein, that political choice is changed this time, because it was unacceptable when it was the previous government. It will be equally unacceptable. And we've got to be open. It was a terrible political choice, and we called them out on it across the council. I hope that changes, because that will make a massive difference, because there are thousands of pounds that our young people should be getting and haven't been getting, that on paper they're entitled to. And it was outrageous then, and it will be outrageous going forward. So, Councillor Hayden, I'll bring you in, and then we're going to move on to the next item.
Very quickly, to acknowledge that that situation that you've just described there is really difficult for parents and children who are not getting, but for the teachers and the school who actually, Colin's quite right, backfill without the extra money, and they do the extra support, and they do meet the need as best they can for those children. It's exhausting, and it's resulted in really kind of very difficult for those professional teachers who want to meet the needs of all their children in the classroom.
Sorry, I did something I very rarely do, which is I misspoke because Jules is coming in.
It's just a very quick point. Exactly those two last points. I mean, I work part-time for an education union, trade union, and these exact points are why we're leading to the depletion of teachers in schools, and why we've got, the average length of a new teacher is 5 years, and then they move on to another career because of all these pressures on them. And teaching is very different to what they expected and what it was 5-10 years ago. And all these reasons are leading to the fact that we really have a crisis in teaching now, and we don't have the amount of teachers that we need, let alone the teaching assistants and everybody else that we need as support in schools. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So we have two recommendations. To note the specific and detailed responses to questions raised at Executive Board on the 19th of June. And then particularly to note the clarity and assurance provided in relation to the interface and for some children, the necessary transition from FFI to EHCP provision. So I will move those two. So I'm happy to second. Thank you, Ollie. All in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That is carried. Thank you very much indeed. That brings us to agenda item 9, the annual report on academic outcomes. Who's kicking us off? Dan, Helen, you going to? Thank you.
Just very briefly, I mean, our children and young people have gone through 2024 assessment as we're bringing the annual report on 2023. But this always takes time to be verified and the outcomes validated, etc. So this is the annual standards report, which presents externally validated outcomes for 2023, which for on statutory assessments and examinations, which took place in our primary and secondary schools.
Colleagues, over to you. I'd say it's quite funny. I was, so I'm a governor of a couple of primary schools, and we've just been doing our teaching and learning meetings where we've been doing the outcomes for the last set of SATs. And then, of course, we're looking at this, which literally looks back a whole year. You're right, it is a bit analogous, but obviously they have to be validated, etc. Colleagues, I mean, it is all there. No, it's not compulsory. Okay, well, in that case, we have two recommendations. You're getting away very lightly here, but Mr. Barton. I'm conscious some offers. There we go.
Are you sure you don't want to ask any questions about this one?
I am sure you might want to make one or two comments in anticipation of the questions that you would have got from colleagues. I'll open the floor to both officers if there's anything you just want to have noted.
I think there was just for me a couple of key points, and I think that the report is very, very, very detailed, and I will thank Becky, who's sitting to my left, for all of the work that she and the team have pulled together in terms of presenting it. Of note, I think is particularly important to look at secondary school outcomes, which we use quite often as the sort of arbiter of the success of an education system in a particular area. And progress 8, which is essentially the number which tells us on average how well our children do in terms of progress from the SATs that Councillor Cohen was talking about through to GCSE, and how much better than average they do. And in Leeds, if memory serves, the figure is 0.12 in the positive, which is quite remarkable. You will probably see, and there are all sorts of reasons why this is the case, for a core city with all of the demographic challenges that we know about, and the poverty and all of the other concerns that we have. To find ourselves at positive 0.12 is really significant, which is why we find ourselves in one of the upper bands. But I would just say that that ought not to be cause for complacency, because it is an aggregated average figure, which doesn't therefore necessarily capture the variety of the rest of the graph, where there are pockets of concern and underachievement in whether that be in a particular school or area across the city. And it is something that I have, as part of my early conversations with school and academy trust leaders over the last 6 months, been talking about. We need to have, and we need to convene an education partnership which provides us with the platform to work even better together to secure improved outcomes for children and young people with SEND, whether that be at SEN support level or at the HCPs, and also for children with other kinds of disadvantage. So I think it's important that we note that the overall figures for Leeds for Progress 8 are very good, particularly as compared with national, but that we can't relent or be complacent as a response to that. Did you want to? Sorry.
Did you want to come in? No, you don't have to. So just one thought. If I look at the data and look historically, we are in primary traditionally a little lower than we would wish. And given that Progress 8 is a measure from SATs to GCSE, of course, if our base is lower there and we just got somebody to, because our attainment 8 is also a little bit low. So I wonder how much we're truly closing the gap. So while our Progress 8 looks good, it's almost a bit like saying to students sitting SATs, so just don't answer all the questions. And then when you get to the GCSEs, go for it. And then our Progress 8 would be storming. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're really, it's where Progress 8 is a little bit disingenuous, and you've got to look at the attainment 8 as well. I always say, it's great if a young person did terribly at their SATs and got an individual, I know you don't get individual Progress 8 score of +1, but it might mean that they only got grade 3s in all their GCSEs, which means we've not actually given them the key to unlock the next door in academic progress. So I suppose I just flag up that mini concern that Progress 8, in a way, it's great, but it's boosted a little bit by the fact that we don't quite get where we'd want to with our primary.
That is a very astute and perennially made argument, depending on whether you are in primary or secondary. We ideally, we want all of our children to make as much progress and attain as highly as possible at every stage. The point that you make, so for a primary school does extremely well, and it isn't the case that this happens, but you're illustrating that someone in a secondary school might say, oh goodness, how are we going to make 3 or 4 levels of progress here from such a high starting point? And ditto the other way around, if they make a very little amount of progress in primary, then do we rest on our laurels and we're still going to do well? That isn't how it works, but I appreciate the challenge. I think the response I would say is we want to have, as a city, the ambition that we push as hard as we can at every level, so that we give children the best chance at every stage of achieving even more highly than they might otherwise do. I'll stop there.
Yes, you correctly observed that Progress 8 is a value-added measure, which is often seen as a fairer measure than a threshold attainment measure, because a threshold attainment measure only tells us the proportion of pupils who achieve that threshold. It doesn't tell us how far over it pupils were who exceeded it, or how far below. Whereas Progress 8 takes account of the entire range of ability in the cohort, the entire range of attainment rather. And I suppose I'd also stress that I suppose you're sort of suggesting there's a scenario where secondary schools, if I have an incoming cohort of pupils with lower than average Key Stage 2 outcomes, can capitalise on that. But really, there's only one way to secure progress, and that's to increase attainment. So I don't think it's necessarily the case, or at all the case, that our secondary schools profit from that. Actually, Progress 8 is quite a good expression of the value added difference that they make to their young people. It's right that you state that we should look at attainment 8 as well, where although that isn't in the top quartile, it's still above the national average. So our outcomes at the end of secondary school are on average allowing pupils to progress to positive post-16 destinations.
I was just delicately, I suppose, making that point. Progress 8, I agree with you, is a great measure. You didn't actually say that, but is a fairer measure. Put words in your mouth. My worry with it sometimes is that a setting can have a really positive progress 8 measure, but still not actually get people through that level 4. And of course, as those who also work in then further education, will they, without that pass in English and maths, you've not got that key to unlock the next stage. So I'm always a little cautious, only a little, just in that regard, to make it, because both matter hugely. We need to make sure we passport people onto the next stage of their education. Helen.
As somebody who took in students at year 7 and turned them out the other end at year 11, making our secondary schools are doing an incredible job, because actually getting positive progress over those secondary years is very difficult, especially when I know how hard our primary colleagues work to get the highest attainment and that in year 6 stats. There were many years when I would wish they wouldn't actually work that hard, because it meant that we had to work even harder. So, and during their teenage years. On your point about post 16 and getting them through to the next stage, the rate, to my mind, what we need is reform of post 16, that we don't make our kids feel worthless if they haven't got a level 4 and they can't progress. Progress in learning and education is a lifetime thing. It doesn't end when you don't, if you don't get to a certain stage at 16, that's it, you're written off. And I see this with family, and I see it with a lot of the kids that I used to teach. And so what we need to do is acknowledge that if you've got 2s and 3s, but you've made value-added progress from where you were in year 6, that's fantastic. And now we as a system, we as a city, are going to allow you to go to a great college, a great setting, and continue going from 3 to 4 to 5, or whatever you want to do. And we're going to provide those courses. And that's what I'm really committed to working at, because frankly, the system at the moment is not valuing and not providing enough opportunity for those 16-year-olds that don't reach that level 4. So I think we need to change the narrative to saying we need to get as many of them to level 4 as possible, and say, what are we doing to support and give opportunities to those who didn't do the traditional thing of passing at a certain level at GCSE.
To be quite candid, there are some brilliant people who in 1,000 years will never get more than something in English or maths. So that doesn't mean that I completely agree with everything. Let's ban SATs while we're at it as well. Sorry. Hate them. I've lost the plot of who's coming next. Sorry. In my bid to ban SATs, it's a load of year 6 teachers going, what are we going to do all year? Fun stuff. Ollie is next. I have you as well, though, David, don't worry.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about page 71, so the free school meal eligibility students. So it was really good to read about pupils reaching the good level of development, how that had increased. So I was wondering if you could say a bit more about what do you see as being the reasons for that increase, and particularly around best practice. So where there are schools that have been particularly effective, what have they done? How is that best practice being shared? Because as we noted in a previous discussion, the population of children and young people is changing. The demographics are changing. There are a higher number of young people in the city who this currently affects, and so it'd be helpful to know what's being done there. Just another observation as well. So there was a previous bit about pupils who speak English as an additional language having lower attainment initially in the primary phase, but then catching up. And it's an observation that strays slightly beyond our remit, but the connection between what's happening with children and young people and what's happening with their parents is really important. And I think we have to consider that wider, those wider issues around integration. And so when we're working with young people, we're not only working with young people, but we are also doing things which are important in terms of the parents and their integration. And I think that has to be considered, even though I appreciate it strays into other areas.
Yes, Congressman. Apologies, I forgot to introduce myself when I first spoke. Becky Lawrence, Learning Improvement. So you raised a couple of points there around the free school meal eligible cohort and outcomes at the foundation stage. So typically what we tend to observe within Leeds, the free school meal eligible cohort varies between the pupil premium cohort, of which free school meal eligibility is a subset, between about a third and a quarter of the cohort. And often what we see is that pupils who aren't free school meal eligible and don't have any other kind of vulnerability tend to attain in line with similar pupils nationally. And the group that are free school meal eligible or have social care involvement, so are termed the disadvantaged cohort, their attainment tends to be significantly lower than pupils that have the same characteristic nationally. And overall, because of the size of that group, that tends to skew the outcomes within the city. That gap tends to widen as pupils go through the school system, not just in Leeds, but nationally. So that's something that's been quite widely researched by the Education Endowment Foundation. So where we are able to reduce that gap in the early years, then that's quite promising for the rest of those young people's education. Support for early years is probably one of the areas where we have the highest demand for trader consultancy support from the Learning Improvement Service. That's probably the aspects of our work where there's the longest wait, actually. It's in quite high demand. It's also one of the areas where we probably fund the most. So we are able to award funding to some schools who are in difficult financial services situations, but would benefit from learning improvement services. A lot of that gets awarded for work around early years support.
Thank you. David.
So Leeds is a Marmot city, so I didn't see any reference to Marmot in the report, and I just wondered whether there is any interconnection with the public health team that's trying to fight 14 years of austerity that's led to the inequalities of health and I think in education as well.
Thank you. So there has been since I've arrived, some early conversations with the public health team around the better start or the best start, and that's for kind of 0 to 2 years old. We are looking at, over the course of the next 6 months, moving to a new mechanism, which will be the best start and beyond. So looking at 0 to 5, taking on some of those recommendations from the Marmot, the update report from 10 years on. All of that's very much in its infancy, but the proposal really is about the creation of a system-led approach around early years, conception to 5, rather than focusing on the kind of silos of school and health and other kind of elements around public health and health visiting. So I'm quite excited about what that looks like, but it's very much in its infancy at the moment. So we can perhaps come back for a deeper look at that, Chair, in 6 months' time, something like that.
We actually have that on our schedule.
Yeah, that kind of work wouldn't be. This is the annual standards report that talks about the actual results, but so it wouldn't come into being talked about in this report. However, as Dan's absolutely right, that's very much what we're looking at, and that where our outcomes are lowest is at foundation stage. So children are coming in, and although we do great work through our children's centres, etc., and kids are coming in, young children are coming into school not particularly school ready, a lot of them, and already below their counterparts within the city and external to the city. So there's a lot of work going into from birth. In fact, from conception to like and that first 1,000 days and things like that, that to really understand and make every child equal, so challenge those inequalities, and so that they are all equal and all of a good standard, you know, I use the word good pejoratively, but a good standard when they actually start school. So then, you know, we're on a firm footing then for the rest of their school career.
Thank you for that, Helen. Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say I'm pleased to see that the standards there is are going up within the EYFS, because some of these children have only known life throughout the COVID, and it's impacted on all young people. So some of these didn't actually begin to meet others until they started the nursery, and missed out on those very early years in which things are embedded in them. So life starts from conception, like Councillor Hayden has just said. But I do think that it's good to see that those standards are now increasing. The levels are increasing of the children in 2023. And hopefully that will ebb out and level out and then feed through school, so we'll get better results all the way up. So I think we have to remember on those going up into secondary schools as well, the levels that they're reaching have all been impacted on by the COVID years, in which those children in poverty obviously struggled more than what the affluent families did, and provided different services. So just to bear that in mind, I think, Chair. Thank you.
Can I just, are you referring to the table, page 71, 5.3? Karen, are you talking about the table, page 71 at 5.3? Yeah, I mean, it's accurate to say. Yeah, table 1. Yeah. Colleague, do you want to cut? I mean, obviously, it's right, we've increased, although we're still band D and very low down in comparison to others, aren't we?
Yes, foundation stage results are typically in Leeds where we see the biggest gap to national, and we tend to see that close or narrow throughout the course of education. We haven't got here results for this year, 2024. We have seen a slight increase in foundation stage outcomes in Leeds, but until we know what they are nationally, we can't really offer any kind of assurance around a long-term trend. And we've only got 2 years on which to benchmark this data, because this was a new framework in 2022.
I think just to come in on that around, I think one of the questions previously was around free school meal eligibility and progress. And if you look at the table at the bottom of 5.6, you can see that the progress, whilst we are still below national, the rate of progress, the trajectory, the steepness of the gradient, which is good, is much better in Leeds versus national. So what it means is we're catching up, but we're improving more quickly than the national is improving. So at some point we will cross the line. I think that's what we're talking about.
Just on Councillor Renshaw's point, you're absolutely right that COVID had a massive effect, but I don't want to be complacent, because COVID covered the UK. So if we're below national, I want to know why, because every child and in places which have similar poverty to us, similar challenges to us, are doing better at foundation stage than us, even though I think our 0 to 5 years provision is really good, is really good and outstanding in many ways. So why aren't we at that national? And I don't want to be complacent, because COVID affected every one of us across the country. So we need to understand in Leeds, and hopefully, as Becky said, we're seeing a rise this year as compared to national. So so what we've been doing will have an effect, but I don't want to be complacent. I want us to be the best that we can and get the best outcomes for our children.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Just sort of to add to that, some context around the support that we're able to offer schools in Leeds from the Learning Improvement Service around outcomes at foundation stage, but across all key stages as well. It's a relatively small service, and we're one of a wide range of stakeholders that are working within schools in Leeds, both the maintained sector and academies. Where we work with schools on foundation stage outcomes, that tends to be impactful, and we do tend to observe increases in foundation stage outcomes, but that's not the only measure. It's around sustained kind of good practice in foundation stage and children's transition to the national curriculum in year one. But once you kind of zoom out to look at the whole city level, aggregation kind of really masks variation there, and those changes, and you can't detect them because you're looking across outcomes for a cohort of almost 10,000 pupils. But if you were to just look at the cohort of schools where we've actually had consultants in doing work over a series of days with foundation stage teachers, it is more apparent to see the impact that work makes.
Thank you for that. Thank you, colleagues, for your contributions there. We have two recommendations. Recommendation A, to note the performance against headline measures for pupils in Leeds in 2023 in comparison to national data. And to B, note the actions taken by the local authority services to support maintained schools and academies in their work to improve outcomes in Leeds. I will propose those. Can someone second? Oh, yeah, it's like my official seconder. Let's go. The next thing's going to have Danko in chair, Ollie Edwards, official seconder. Thank you. Those in favour? Against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you very much indeed. I feel like I'm in practice. That brings us then to item 10, the SACRE Annual Report 2022 to 2023. I shall give a moment for colleagues to switch around. And Helen, you going to kick us off?
Absolutely. I'm really excited about this because I was an RE teacher for 16 years. I've been to SACRE meetings and read all the reports and, followed the curriculum and what have you. So I will be going on the board and very much look forward to joining colleagues from around the city and meeting the challenges that teaching religious education and in schools. I'm very, very aware of it. I lived it. So I really welcome this report and thank everybody for their work on it. And to everybody who works teaching and building those relationships and that cohesion between people of all faiths and none, and our young people and children in our schools in very challenging circumstances. So thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, I know I haven't got an enormous amount to add, but all of the work that underpins this report, the review and the content of the curriculum was done really prior to my arrival in Leeds. But I was lucky enough to attend the launch event on the 7th of May. And it's unlike anything I've ever seen anywhere else in terms of the level of engagement, the fanfare, the importance that is rightly given to this subject and the quality of the curriculum across the city. It really is incredible. I think there were hundreds, I think, of RE teachers. I don't know what the collective noun is, but there were lots of them. Yes, there were lots of them, and but the level of engagement, and it was just really, really impressive. And that is testament to Russell, who's with us today, and the team who have been working on the development of the curriculum. I just wanted to say that because I think we can otherwise be complacent or not recognise the quality of work that's going on in this city around RE. So I just wanted to put that in there. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe the collective is known as it's a prayer of RE teachers. I believe that's. And may I echo that? It's absolutely correct. There is a huge amount of high quality work that goes on as the chair of a faith school, 2 faith schools in fact. I'm only chair of one of them. We see firsthand some of the amazing work the city does. It really does. We are delighted to have Russell with us today, who chairs the board. Russell, is there anything you'd like to say?
I'd just like to say thank you for coming, because we believe that RE is actually one of your key subjects, and those that do attend SACRE and they are committed to it actually can see how it benefits not just the schools and the teaching of the subjects like history, geography, philosophy, arts. They're all covered in RE in many ways. And I think we can do more. We really can do a lot more, but we need to just, I guess, trumpet ourselves a bit more loudly. We have enormous support and good resources that we can give to our teaching staffs around the city, both primary and secondary. And of course, as you saw, there were over 120 teachers there at the launch of the new SACRE syllabus. So we really want to build on that, and we want to give confidence to teachers, particularly where they may not have the speciality learning for the subject. And we believe that that can be done quite well with engaging with other faith groups around the city. And for those that may or may not know how SACRE is made up, we do have representatives in 4 different categories, and those include faith groups and the Church of England and local councillors. And have I missed the other one? Which one have I missed? I'll remember it in a minute. But the groups that are here representing the different faiths are really important, and we want to just build on that. And we know that as we engage with community groups and faith groups, we will have the ear of wider community, which actually I think is really important. So it sort of is a good way of holding a mirror up to the different faith groups in the city and giving opportunity for those expressions to come out and to be talked about and not glossed over. So we want to be upfront, and we want to encourage a confident conversation and not be the elephant in the room. Thank you.
Anybody else before I bring colleagues in? Sounds like a good time for the council's faith lead to join in then. Ollie.
Thank you very much, Chair. And it's been a real pleasure to be on the SACRE board this last year. And I would encourage any other colleagues who are interested to get involved. There's a huge amount of work that's been done, particularly around the locally agreed syllabus. And there's a huge amount of work that's going on that doesn't often get attention. I mean, one of the things that I picked up reading through the last reading through the reports here, and it's also something that we've talked about at SACRE, and it's a bit of a concern, is around the teaching of RE at Key Stage 4 to non-exam classes. So this isn't only a Leeds issue, this is a national issue. And I know now that we have the ear of an executive member with a particular interest in this area, which trumps mine considerably. I think that is something that is worth thinking about. There's a huge amount of positive work that's being done across the city, but how can that be extended, and particularly to children and young people who are not studying RE for the purposes of exams, but nevertheless, there is a wider benefit for communities across the city?
Yeah, it's always been very, very difficult, and got more difficult given the pressures of time on the curriculum, especially at Key Stage 4. yeah, my own daughter said to me a few weeks ago, but I've got to do 5 lessons of RE a fortnight, you know, and I went, yes, you do. You know, don't come complaining to me. You know, because fitting everything else in, and she'd like more of what of something else. And it is, but I think what Russell was saying about the fact that RE, and this is why I loved it, I loved teaching it, I loved studying it, was because I loved geography and history as well. And I loved, if I had the chance to study sociology, I probably would have loved that as well. And, you know, and all those sort of subjects all come into, and philosophy and everything, which I ended up, you know, focusing on. But it's all in there, and the benefits are very widely to be seen. And there was a really interesting debate, and I can't remember his name, on the Today programme about the benefits a few weeks ago, about the benefits of learning RE and teaching and the teaching of RE to the other subjects. So when I was teaching at Bingley Grammar School, oh God, no, I did start this century. It was 2000. But you know, a long time ago, our A-level students, the physics department actually advised their students to do RS if they because of, just because you can in science doesn't mean you should, and all those ethical and philosophical arguments and kind of issues that you look into are really, really beneficial to people who are studying, especially things like physics. And it's like, I taught a lad at A-level who wanted to be an astronaut. I've never found out whether he did or not. He was certainly bright enough to. But yeah, and also if they were doing medicine, they were encouraged to do RS as well, because of all those ethical issues that you get. And I can't think of anything better than studying people, which is what RE is all about. Selling it though to pupils in Key Stage 4 who are under the cosh as it is, and under a great deal of stress, and why are we doing this? Why are we wasting this time? I could be doing something else, is extremely difficult, and something that we'll just have to keep challenging. In fact, what I used to do is actually turn it into something that we'd study meditation or something like that, and turn it into a real positive for them in terms of the rest of the curriculum.
Thank you. Any other colleagues wanting to come in? Sorry, Emma.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really enjoyed the report. Without giving away all my work history today, which was quite varied. I used to be a youth worker with Leeds Faith in Schools. So have some experience of being a guest, like in different schools. And I think what really seemed to engage young people were stories. You know, we've got a wealth of stories in Leeds, haven't we, from all different faith backgrounds. So it's, yeah, that's a way to engage kids who like maybe weren't from a faith background. And also we used to do kind of retreat days or where we took kids away from school and just offered quite creative prayer and reflection spaces that were really accessible to everybody. And it was just amazing what came out of that for kids, that they could just reflect and think and have a safe space to do that on their life, on loss, on grief, on hopes, fears. And there's a real lack of space for that in school, isn't there? But if there could be more, and just sort of giving kids that space to have a bit of time out who maybe don't have that in their life, that was really valuable. I think a question that I had was about the gender gap of attainment, and that was something that stood out to me. Whether that's something that you're looking at as a board. My son has just finished a degree in philosophy after doing religious studies A-level. So maybe he's an exception to the rule, but it's just really interesting, isn't it, that there's particular issues with boys not engaging.
If I could just respond to that. I think there has to be a confidence in the classroom. And if we can support, which is our role as a SACRE, if we can support teachers and have the resources to say, like, come to this training, we'll give you more confidence to fill in the gaps that you don't have to fill in for geography, history, philosophy, or whatever. And I think if people would, just be more confident and have more confidence without the fear of being misunderstood, I think that would be the most significant benefit to teachers in our schools. And we know that there are budgets supposedly allocated for our SACRE. And one of the points that we kind of like wanted to make was our connections with the national SACREs, which is really useful to hear what's going on around the country. And there is evidence that those local authorities where they have compulsory RE for GCSE actually do go through really well, and they do actually succeed with all their achievements. So there is evidence that this could be a solution for meeting the requirements within schools, certainly at Key Stage 4. So I think that what I'd like to see is, us being able to offer more support. And if the comments that recommendations that we've put in the last page of the report could actually be sort of reviewed, that would be really helpful. We know that this is a densely populated city, and we have a lot to do because there's so many schools and so many opportunities. But we think we can do that efficiently with the resources that if we, given the right support. Currently, we're not sort of taking any more than a quarter of what we think we should have. So we're just putting it out there. We know money's tight, but if you don't ask, you don't get. And the squeaky wheel may just get the oil.
Thank you. Colleagues, anyone else? Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Somebody's been on SACRE for many, many years, probably well over 10, if not 15. It's always been a challenge with getting the numbers to attend, and I'm guilty of that over the last 12 months because the timing of the meeting has clashed with other things that I've been doing. I also notice on this report, and I know it's always been a challenge, that some of the faiths don't provide members to the board, and I think that that's a sad thing. And as I say, I hold my hand up as well as an elected member who is one of the members, because it is a very important role, and it does struggle to fill all the gaps. And I also note that in one of the reports it says that 40 out of 220 primary schools responded to a questionnaire, and I think it's an uphill battle that SACRE are tackling very, very well, and they're providing an excellent resource. But it would appear that at some points it could do with a bit more input into the board, but also at the other end a bit more I don't know what the word is, a bit more interaction with some of the schools, that there's some valuable work done, and it's sort of perhaps falling on deaf ears or not being used as well as it could be. And I just wonder if that's something, and I must get to the next meeting, but I just wonder if that's something is worth looking at to try and improve SACRE's offer, but also to make sure it is received by schools and used. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I think there is, for a long time, for all sorts of very bad and unjustifiable reasons, been a hierarchy of subjects in schools. And I think probably those of us who teach or used to teach different subjects would always fight for the importance of our own. Mine was French, Councillor Hayden's was RE. They're all important. I think the point is that broad and balanced curriculum is what we always talk about, because every subject is important. I wanted to say, in reflection to what Councillor Edwards and Councillor Downs said, was around, as a world at the moment, with so much conflict, where in a city like Leeds, where there is such a lot of a challenge around youth violence increasing, and all of the challenges that brings, the way that our discourse as a kind of community has moved to a place of polarity and personal abuse rather than reason and argument. Never has it been more important to have our children being educated around RE and ethics than now. So I think there's something about how we promote the quality of the curriculum that's been developed here, and I think we have a real role in that as a local authority. So really, really good point from Councillor just now in relation to that, and I think we can work outside of this room to ensure that we promote use of the curriculum and interaction with it in a way that perhaps hasn't been uptaken this year. Thank you.
Shinaz.
Thank you, Chair. Back in my youth work days, working with young people, I know faith was really, really important to many. Do you have any young people on your board?
That's actually a very good question. No is a short answer, but we do make a point of getting into schools and visiting schools. We also have a few teachers that are very young in their outlook, but we would we do see there being an opportunity to develop more connections with the youth, and we have recently discussed ways of creating engagement, such as the creative art solution and creating some sort of competition within schools. But we know there are easy wins of actually just taking the SACRE meeting to schools and taking the opportunity to talk with pupils actually at the schools before we start our meeting. So we can do more, and that's an easy fix for us. But yes, I agree, we should be engaging much more with the pupils.
Thank you for your response. I think having young people of different faiths, they'd be massive advocates for you and do a lot of the work for you going back to the different schools. So it might cut a lot of your work out for you.
It's a really interesting point, because we, as was mentioned earlier, we have a fantastic voice and influence team, which have all kinds of different councils, you know, from children looked after to care leavers to youth parliament, youth council, etc., and the children's mayor. So can I take that away and see if we can work with SACRE and our voice and influence team to see if we can get some children and young people involved? Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for your contributions and questions there. Before I move to the recommendations, and I know I always say we must never read out the reports, but I do just want to bring everyone's attention specifically to page 112 of our packs, which is section 7 of SACRE's annual report, where there are these 6 recommendations, advice to the local authority. Can I specifically draw out number 4, which is to ensure SACRE's annual report is considered carefully by the scrutiny panel of the council and its content noted. And I hope that members of SACRE will feel that we have done that and done that justice today. And I want to thank them for the report. Colleagues, you will note at page 89, we have a recommendation before us. With your permission, I would like to amend that very slightly. So it says members are asked to note the content and recommendations set out within the appended report. I would like, with your permission, to add the words and to thank all who contributed to the report and who updated the curriculum. So that is my proposal. Edwards, thank you. Councillor Edwards seconded. That is his job. All in favour? All against? Any abstentions? That is carried. Thank you very much. And thank you for bringing item. And can I say, I think that is the longest we have debated and spent on that item, and that is the correct order of things. It is a hugely important area of work within the city. It's right that it gets the attention we've just given it. Not that we had any choice with Helen as the executive member. Moves us to item 11, the work programme. Rob.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Item 11 is the work programme, which we consider each time the board meets. Appendix 1 provides the draft work programme, which hopes to reflect the views of discussion, mainly from the sources of work item at the last meeting, but also more generally at that meeting. And then Appendix 2 is the minutes of the last meeting of the Executive Board. As ever, this item offers members an opportunity to comment and shape on the work programme. So I think I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanaz.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if we could look at the work programme of working with youth service in the city and what kind of services are available for young people at the minute.
Helen.
The youth service sits in communities directorate, so that I'm not speaking for you, Chair. You can do it expertly yourself, but I mean, I would be quite happy to do some cross working, but it would be down to that scrutiny chair, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think I'll bring Karen in a second. So we're doing a little rehearsal of what we did in the pre-meet. So I think we might look at maybe doing a joint working group, because I think there are things we'd all want to pick up. Karen, you're going to call them life coaches. Go for it.
Yeah, because the life coaches, I understand, still come under children's services. So maybe we could look at the life coaches and what impact they've had and what work they're doing.
So we have the targeted youth services such as the life coach. They sit in our early help services but work closely with the locality youth work provision, which is a community. So I think that because the work crosses over, it would be good to do it jointly to have a more holistic offer. So that would make sense. And although they sit in separate directorates, we do work very closely together on kind of their remits. I think that would make sense.
My suggestion, and if you can't kick me, is too far away. What might be an idea is for by the September meeting, Rob has maybe scoped out with the other scrutiny panel and worked out what might a way forward that's helpful. As well as addressing something that you want to, I want to be reassured that it's going something that's going to take things forward as well. So let's come to September with what a proposal might look like and do it in terms of a working group, a joint working group.
Thank you. I just thought that because we've not already had anything reported back on the impacts of the life coach work and how that is being delivered within the communities, that maybe we could look at that as a separate issue on its own.
Should we maybe bring to, I'm just trying to not overload agendas because you won't thank me for that. November. Yeah. Maybe we could bring a paper to the November board meeting that speaks to that. Bring a paper. Well, let's notionally look at that, and if that's not doable, I'm sure officers will tell me offline. Get a phone call from Julie. Jordan.
Yeah, as it was obviously in a manifesto promise, and it was in the King's Speech, but with the reintroduction of the school support staff negotiation body, I'm just wondering, is there the role of support staff and retention is often on many of our sort of agendas and reports, sort of often gets brought up, but we haven't really done a dive in or a focus, and I think there might be a place to look at the impact specifically in Leeds, our retention of staff, but also with what might happen with the Labour government. What I personally, I want to see more concrete sort of positions from Leeds on what we expect of support staff as well, because we know that there is a big issue with schools funding. Support staff are just taking on more and more responsibilities, and half the time they don't even have that qualification sometimes. So I just think it deserves a specific look at, really. Thank you.
Helen, Dan?
Yeah, I would concur with that. I'm very happy to have that staff, as we've discussed today, staff recruitment and retention, and the pressures that teachers are under. I don't know how they do it, and the support staff, especially as well, who don't get as well paid as the, you know, and sometimes are on term only contracts, etc. So, you know, I very much welcome looking at that. We should have the capacity to do that, and also with what we're talking about today with the EHCPs, and because what we were talking about earlier with educational psychologists, and Dan would love to employ a whole lot more. It's not only a money problem. There aren't any. It takes 9 years to train as one. So I'm considering a career change, but it's having that resource as well. And with the manifesto pledge of 6,500 teachers, we can't get them all new, can we? We're going to have to get people like me who left back again, as I think would be the best scenario of and how are we going to do that? How are we going to get people back that used to teach there? I'm not going back, by the way. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and upskilled and retrained. Yeah.
Yeah, because on one of the issues with support staff is the pay rates that support staff receive as well. And we find that not only are they being made redundant, they're also leaving because they can earn more in Tesco or other supermarkets are available, obviously. But that's what we're finding in the industry, that is what's happening, because support staff are on Green Book terms and conditions, which is local authority, not teach terms and conditions, which is a different set of contracts. So yeah, there are a lot of issues with support staff and how they're retained and what we do to retain those support staff. There is a big piece of work there.
If I'm just able to just come back in and just sort of emphasize, I don't know if this is even, we're able to bring this sort of thing to a scrutiny meeting, but it isn't just like looking at the retention, but I think there's an opportunity where we can say, for instance, what sort of level a TA is at, what we would like them to be able to, I think it's good for employment of staff and retention that we want to put forward and say, at this level, we expect this or this. And then there is a clear level of training, pay increase. I don't want to wait for the government to define that. If I'm personal, I want us to lead. I would like us to lead on this specifically. Thank you.
So before I bring Dan in, we can absolutely look at doing it. I don't see any issue. We will have to be cautious to stay strategic rather than operational. I think that's my one mini caveat. Dan, I'm going to give you the final word on this one.
Thank you. Support staff make the world go round in schools. We know that. It's absolutely the case. We couldn't deliver against our promises around SEND if we didn't have them. Our school teachers couldn't cope without them. They are absolutely essential and integral. So I'm completely supportive of all of the sentiment around, a fair day's pay for a fair day's work in relation to support staff. Absolutely. There are some caveats that it's really important that I put in terms of expectation management. One of them obviously being around budget. I have to say that. Because the DSG, the Dedicated Schools Grant for Leeds, which pays for them, we've already heard today, isn't enough to fund SEND provision. I'll also say that the complex and fragmented nature of the school system in terms of the employment, the number of employers that there are in the city, means that it is almost impossible to secure a unilateral agreement around what we do there. So I'm just there's something about the reconcilability of the intention and the reality, which is really important for us to consider. That doesn't mean that we can't have the conversation, and we should, and we are already actually yesterday. But I think let's try and understand what's possible and work within that.
Thank you for that. I think it'd be useful just thinking, obviously come October and November, we're going to get some financial updates from the government and what their plans are. So maybe if we look post there, because there may be something within that package that gives a direction of travel on at a topper line level, just made a word up. It's a top line level. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for that. Thank you for all your contributions today. Our next meeting of the Children and Family Scrutiny Board is scheduled for Wednesday, the 4th of September at 10 a.m. Members of the board, we will meet for our pre-meeting at 9:45. Thank you again for attending, and we finished bang on 4:30 if I speak really slowly now.